Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're cracking open a couple of really, well, mind-bending books.
Oh, yeah. Which ones?
Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, that's from '54, and then the follow-up, Heaven and Hell, from 1956.
Huxley. Right. So this is where he talks about his mescaline experiences, medically supervised. I remember that part.
Exactly. He took this alkaloid from a Mexican cactus, the kind used by shamans, and it led him to what he called a sacramental vision of reality.
A sacramental vision. Wow. And Heaven and Hell then gets more into the implications, right? The sort of mental and, well, ethical side of things.
Yeah, precisely. It looks at how these drug-induced states, these hallucinations, can potentially lead to mystical insights.
Yeah.
Or, the opposite, self-annihilation even.
It's that fine line, isn't it, between heaven and hell, quite literally in his titles.
It is. And that title, The Doors of Perception, it's not original to Huxley, is it?
No, that's from William Blake. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The quote is something like, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite."
Infinite. That's the key word. So, for you listening, that's really what we're trying to unpack today.
Right.
What did Huxley find when those doors seemed to open up a bit?
Yeah.
And what could that possibly tell you about your own reality?
And we should probably tackle that misconception about Huxley first, the whole idea of him being this sort of hippie prophet.
Right, like he was just some early psychedelic guru.
Yeah, and while there are links, he definitely took inspiration from certain poets. His visions had biblical elements, and the mescaline use mirrored Native American rituals, a bit like Jim Morrison later.
Yeah.
His whole approach was actually, well, quite different, rooted in the Enlightenment and the skepticism of his grandfather, Thomas Huxley.
That's a great point. His writing style isn't that fervent, ecstatic style you get from De Quincey, say, or Artaud.
Not at all. It's much calmer. Almost like a report, really. More like Montaigne or maybe Hume. He's looking at it anthropologically almost. Like, what does this altered perception reveal about the human soul?
And it's fascinating because he himself said he wasn't really prone to fantasies. I am, and as far back as my memory extends, have always been little given to daydreaming. He even struggled to visualize things.
Which makes his actual mescaline experience even more striking, doesn't it? It wasn't about inventing fantasy worlds inside his head.
Exactly. So our mission here, for you listening, is to get past that popular image, understand what Huxley actually went through, and maybe think about what his insights could mean for how you perceive things.
Okay, so he goes into this experiment having done his homework. He's read about mescaline. He has some expectations.
Right. He's thinking he'll get those closed-eye visuals. People reported, geometric patterns, maybe fantastic buildings, heroic figures.
Well, like Blake saw, or maybe A.E. George William Russell, these symbolic dramas leading to some ultimate revelation.
But what he didn't quite bank on was, well, himself, his own mind.
Exactly. His own temperament, his education, his habits of mind, all those personal filters we have, they really shaped what happened next.
And the big surprise, he barely got any of those closed-eye fireworks.
Almost none, right? Instead, the huge change was with his eyes open, looking at the world around him.
Yeah, he puts it so clearly. Nothing of landscapes, abysmal spaces, nothing remotely like a drama or a parable. The other world existed out there in what I could see with my open eyes. The great change was in the realm of objective fact. His inner world, relatively unimportant, he says.
That's just fascinating. So it wasn't hallucination in the typical sense, but intensification.
Exactly. Ordinary things suddenly became extraordinary, like he looks at flowers in a vase or a chair or just some folds of fabric.
And they take on this transcendent character.
Yes, revealing the miracle of the entire blossoming of existence in all its nakedness. And time changed, too. It became this perpetual present.
Wow, just being. Which brings us to that concept he talks about, Istigkeit.
Istigkeit, yeah, it's German for isness or being. He connects it to Meister Eckhart, the mystic. It's this sense of the fundamental reality of things beneath all our labels.
Which is quite different from, say, Plato, isn't it? Plato separated being, the perfect forms, from becoming, the messy world we see. He identified being with abstraction, really.
Right. But Huxley, under mescaline, sees it differently. He looks at flowers shining with their own inner light and realizes their significance is their fleeting existence, their ephemerality that nonetheless meant eternal life, a perpetual perishing that was at the same time pure being.
So the profound truth wasn't somewhere else, abstract. It was right there, in the moment, in the object itself.
And the colors. He talks about colors becoming incredibly intense.
He could see tiny differences in hue he'd never noticed.
Yeah. And he ties this to the idea of omniscience, this sort of all-knowing perspective, where things like color, what philosophers call secondary qualities, actually become primary.
That flips Locke on his head, doesn't it? Locke thought shape, size, mass, the primary qualities were the real deal. Color, taste, those were secondary.
But for Huxley, in that state, color seemed more real, more important than dimensions or position. It's interesting that heightened color sense pops up in mystical accounts too, and sometimes in psychosis.
And what about space? Did that change?
Well, he says space didn't vanish, but it definitely lost its importance. His mind wasn't focused on where is it, how far.
It was more about what?
More about intensity of existence, depth of significance, relations within a pattern. He looks at books on a shelf, not caring about their order, but seeing them shine with a living light, some brighter than others.
So he could still function spatially, walk around the room, but the meaning of space had shifted.
Exactly. Which leads into this key theory, the brain as a reducing valve.
Ah, yes, the reducing valve for omniscience,
Right.
the idea that our brain filters out this massive amount of potential reality.
To let through only what's useful for biological survival, we focus on the practical stuff.
And then language comes in and locks down that limited view. We label things, categorize them, and start thinking that filtered reality is the only reality.
Right, so these other worlds, glimpses of beauty, mystical insights, they're part of that larger reality, that omniscience that we can access when the valve is bypassed or turned down.
And mescaline, in his view, reduces the efficiency of that valve.
Yeah, the ego weakens, the filter gets less effective, and suddenly things that aren't biologically useful, like intense beauty, or maybe even ESP, or just the raw glory and meaning of primal existence can get through.
Leading eventually to that sense of depersonalization where the boundaries dissolve, that all is in all things.
That all is, in very truth, each thing. Yeah. It's a classic mystical trope, really. He just got there via, well, mescaline.
But then there's the practical side, the ethical dimension. How do you live your life if you're constantly perceiving the infinite in a teacup?
Right. He notes that intense focus on the present and how concerns about people, time, morals, practical stuff, they just faded.
It's a real question. Does that state make you detached? Uncaring, even?
Could do. But Huxley also sees a potential benefit. Stepping outside the ego, even temporarily, might give you a perspective on a bigger picture, a divine order of things.
And maybe feeling that interconnectedness, that all is in all, could actually reduce selfishness. Like, why be greedy if everything is ultimately part of the same thing?
It's a possibility he explores. If you truly felt it, maybe those negative impulses would just lose their power.
It's a fascinating idea. But then remember his closed-eye visions? They weren't quite so profound.
Not at all. He found them kind of disappointing, actually. Vulgar. Ordinary. Like looking at stuff in an American store.
That's quite the contrast to the external world's transformation, and his interpretation is key, isn't it?
Yeah, he realized that floating American store was, well, him, his ego. His own personal baggage projected onto the inner screen. A bit humbling.
Definitely. And it brings up his point about art and visionaries. Having the vision is one thing.
But being able to communicate it, to translate it into art, that's crucial. He says, pretty bluntly, the visionary who is a bad artist is completely uninteresting.
Ouch. But true, perhaps. The experience needs a skilled translator to resonate.
Now, music didn't get visually transfigured for him, but it still affected his understanding. He listened to Gesualdo.
The Renaissance composer known for those jarring harmonies.
Yeah. And he felt it represented psychological breakdown, but strangely, with orderly fragments within it. Like there was still some underlying structure, a higher order.
So even in disintegration, he perceived unity. Interesting.
But then he heard Alban Berg's lyric suite, modern, atonal.
Yeah.
And his reaction was just visceral.
What did he say?
This will be hell. Just like that. It tapped into something much darker.
It shows how different stimuli can resonate with these altered states in really specific ways.
Okay, so then he goes into the garden, the famous garden chair incident.
Ah, yes. This is where the perception shift becomes really concrete.
Totally. No ego filter, just raw sensory input. He sees the chair, the stripes, intense blue, incandescent light, and he's just lost in them.
So absorbed, he forgets it's a chair, something you sit on.
Completely loses the functional aspect. And that's when he has this flash of insight into madness. He remembers reading about a schizophrenic woman obsessed with the pattern on someone's coat.
Because that overwhelming sensory detail becomes the only reality, blotting out everything else.
Exactly, and that scared him a bit. The fear of being overwhelmed, disintegrated by this raw, unfiltered reality compared to the comfortable world of symbols we usually live in.
It connects to that idea of the mysterium tremendum in religion, the awe and terror of the divine.
Yeah, he brings in mystics like Bohm, William Law, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, how that intense divine light can be bliss for some, but purgatorial fire for others, depending on their inner state.
The schizophrenic, he suggests, might be someone perpetually exposed to that unfiltered reality without the means to cope or interpret it.
Which brings him back to the importance of, well, faith. Or maybe trust in love, as he puts it. Navigating these intense states seems to require more than just rationality.
Your emotional state is key. Negative emotions, fear, resentment, they seem to breed terrifying visions.
Right. It's why he suggests, controversially perhaps, that a repentant sinner with faith might fare better in such states, or even at the point of death, than a self-righteous person who's secretly better.
It's about the inner landscape, not just outward appearances.
He then touches briefly on that universal human urge for self-transcendence.
The desire to get outside ourselves, beyond the everyday ego.
And he argues that banning things like alcohol isn't really the solution. People will find ways. He suggests we need better, maybe less harmful avenues. He even posits mescaline as potentially less damaging than alcohol or tobacco.
It's a recurring theme. This drive is fundamental, and if traditional paths like religion don't fulfill it, people turn to substitutes like drugs.
This leads him to coin that phrase, the antipodes of the mind.
Like undiscovered continents within our own consciousness.
Exactly. A realm of visionary experience populated by strange landscapes, bizarre creatures, things totally alien to our normal waking life. It's the new world beyond the old world of our everyday awareness.
And various things can open a door to these antipodes.
Yeah, hypnosis, physiological states like low blood sugar, fasting, sensory deprivation, and drugs, of course. They all seem to bypass that brain's reducing valve.
He even mentions research on dream color, the idea being that the colors aren't about us, but about the inherent nature of that inner world, the fauna of the antipodes.
Which might be naturally more vivid than our external world, precisely because our everyday perception is dulled by verbal concepts.
And A.E., George Russell, had that idea of windows in the soul, showing us images not from our own imagination, but from some divine conception, visions as something received, not created.
So Huxley describes the typical trajectory of these induced visions. It starts with colored shapes, right?
Geometric patterns, yeah. Then evolving into complex things, carpets, carvings, mosaics.
And then these huge, shifting landscapes, heroic figures, mythical beasts, all with that incredible light, color, and sense of deep meaning.
He uses Weir Mitchell's peyote account as a detailed example. Starry points, colored films, Gothic towers dripping with gems, mountains, a giant claw, colored waves. A whole journey.
And he points out how similar these descriptions are to mythic other worlds.
Heavens, fairylands, they all share that preternatural light, intense color, jewel-like landscapes, immense significance. Think of Ezekiel's Eden covered in stones of fire.
So our fascination with jewels, with precious stones, Huxley thinks it comes from them resembling objects seen in these visionary states.
Basically, yeah. They seem valuable because they echo the luminous, intensely colored things from that other world. He even mentions Socrates describing a higher realm with purer colors and more brilliant stones.
So anything in art or nature that evokes that luminous, otherworldly quality can potentially trigger a flicker of that visionary state.
That seems to be his suggestion. Even the hypnotist's bright, fixed object might work partly on that principle.
He wonders why bright objects work. Is it eye fatigue? Psychological focus leading to dissociation?
Or his more mystical idea, that brightness somehow reminds the unconscious of its home in the antipodes, pulling attention inward.
So certain art forms, jewelry, stained glass, tapestries are particularly good at this.
Especially when made by artists who've had visionary experiences themselves, they know how to capture that quality.
He talks about the Middle Ages valuing this, hence the stained glass. Then shifts in art history, like the Reformation, moved away from it, while the Counter-Reformation used polished stone and metal differently.
And he pushes back against Plato and Aquinas, saying pure bright colors are the essence of beauty.
He argues they're characteristic of the other world, yes, and can induce visions, but they're just one kind of beauty. Maybe we like uncolored statues now because we're saturated with bright artificial colors.
That's an interesting thought. Back then, visionary colors would have been a huge contrast to daily life. Now, maybe not so much.
He also mentions artists like Rembrandt conveying the visionary indirectly, through symbolism, like his meditation of the philosopher representing the mind itself.
And Blake's cherubim, the inhabitants of the antipodes. Huxley notes they don't do much in visions, they just are.
Like the blessed in paintings of heaven. Forcing them into human dramas falsifies the experience, he thinks.
And that stillness in great religious art, Egyptian gods, Buddhas, Madonnas, that contributes to their power, transporting us.
Visionary experience includes landscapes too, though, right? Buildings, gardens, mountains.
Yeah, but he notes painting didn't always focus on that, though artists like Constable or Zurbaran could capture a visionary quality even in realism. Blake focused more on the figures, the cherubim.
He briefly mentions Kumaraswamy on Eastern art, where symbol and meaning are inseparable.
And this balance throughout history, appreciating nature's diversity versus the drive for sublime impersonal experience, with visionary art as a bridge.
Back to landscapes, he notes they're relatively recent in art. Both distance and extreme closeness can create enchantment.
Sung landscapes versus Rousseau's jungle close-ups. Both echo the vastness and detail of the antipodes.
You need an inhuman perspective for those distant scenes, he says. Solitude, no human clutter.
And the close-up view, like the nearsighted artist or lovers embracing, involves merging with something larger. These close-ups, even turning into patterns like arabesques, can evoke the geometric forms of the other world.
Okay, but then there's the dark side. Heaven implies hell.
Right, the negative visionary experience. It still has preternatural light and significance, but it's distorted. Smoky light, visible darkness. He mentions the term for the schizophrenic's world, the country of stark illumination.
And examples in art and literature.
Late Van Gogh, Kafka, Géricault, Goya's Dark Period, Browning's Childe Roland, Charles Williams's novels, all capturing that feeling of a negatively transfigured reality.
The physical feeling is different too, not floating and detached, but
Trapped, intensified individuality, feeling compressed in your own body. A horrible sensation by the sounds of it.
which reinforces his point about faith. It's not just theology, it's psychologically crucial for a positive visionary trip. Negative emotions breed terror.
Yeah, the repentant sinner versus the resentful good person again. It's about the state of mind. He even speculates this applies to the moment of death.
What about things like chanting or mantras? Does he connect those?
He does. He suggests repetitive practices might work physiologically increasing CO2, maybe, to slightly lower the brain's reducing valve, letting glimpses of that biologically useless stuff from omniscience through.
Interesting. And the stroboscope thing.
That's really weird, isn't it? Sitting before a strobe light produces vivid colored patterns, the colors depending on the frequency. And stranger still, it seems to enrich mescaline or LSD visions.
He gives an example of shapes turning into a stunning Japanese landscape.
It just highlights how little we understand about the brain chemistry and electrical activity behind all this. Penfield's stimulating memories with electrodes. Could you stimulate visions?
And why are these experiences often unrepeatable? What neurological trace do they leave, if any? So many questions.
He ends with a kind of reflective appendix, doesn't he? Musing on the decline of visionaries in the West.
Yeah, maybe philosophical disbelief and modern distractions have pushed them aside, unlike the past when they were honored.
And his final thought is quite provocative. Maybe future mystics, understanding the biochemistry, will seek help from scientists.
And conversely, scientists studying the brain need to look to the visionaries, the artists, the mystics, to understand what these other worlds actually are and what they mean.
A call for collaboration across seemingly vast divides.
So wrapping this up, Huxley's journey really gives you, our listener, a different lens to look at your own perception, doesn't it? It goes way beyond the usual ideas.
Definitely. Makes you think about your own doors of perception, what influences them, your mood, your surroundings, maybe even that piece of music you just heard.
And here's that final thought to leave you with. If our brains are reducing valves, filtering reality, what else might be out there, just beyond the threshold of normal awareness? And what does Huxley's experience tell us about the potential, and maybe the perils, of trying to push those doors open?
Lots to ponder about consciousness, reality, and the edges of our everyday world.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel